Today we got some more actual history about the rough times that settlers had on the West Texas frontier in the 19th century due to Indian depredations committed by the Comanches and other tribes. This video will, for now, be shown only on Patreon because it is a quite disturbing story about the torture and outraging of Mrs. Martha Sherman in Parker County, Texas in the fall of 1860. We will be reading from this book, Indian Depredations in Texas by J.W. Wilbarger. This book was published all the way back in 1889. Wilbarger's account of this attack is quite intense, but even so he still refrains from relating certain details that he deems too shameful to relate. Because of that, I have posted a longer version of this video on our Patreon page. In this longer video, we also read from two additional accounts of the attack on the Sherman home that are much more graphic and intense, and that provide some interesting details about the peculiar appearance of one of the Comanches who attacked Mrs. Sherman. You can view the longer video by becoming a Patreon member or by purchasing the video individually. So here is J.W. Wilbarger's account of the Comanche raid on the Sherman home near Weatherford, Texas. The name of Parker seems to be an ill-fated one in Texas, when taken in connection with the Indian history of our country. Parker County was named for the Venerable Isaac Parker, who in the year 1855 represented that county, which then embraced a much larger territory than now, in the legislature. He belonged to the Parker family who came to Texas in 1833 and settled in Montgomery County, now Grimes County. This same family of Parkers, with a few others, settled in Limestone County a little later, and in the year 1835 built Parker's Fort, of historic fame, near where the town of Groesbeck now stands. The full history of the Parker Fort massacre appears elsewhere in this volume. It will be seen from the long list of murders at the hands of the Indians as having occurred in Parker County and herein recorded, which list is but a very partial one, that no other county in the state furnishes a history with such a bloody record of barbaric cruelty. During the year 1859, there lived two families, John Brown and the Sherman family, in the northwestern portion of Parker County on Rock Creek, near the line of Palo Pinto, some 3 or 4 miles apart. This was from 12 to 15 miles from the town of Weatherford, the county seat of Parker County. In the month of December 1859, a party of marauding Indians made a raid into Parker and adjoining counties, stealing horses and committing murders wherever they went. Their presence was first made known in Parker County when they attacked John Brown, who was on the range about 1/2 mile from his house, looking after his horses. He was surrounded by a party of 5 or 6 Indians, shot and speared to death and then scalped. The Indians carried off several head of horses. They then proceeded to his residence, but Mrs. Brown, seeing them coming, barred the doors and thereby saved herself, as the Indians were afraid to attack it, thinking probably that there were men inside to defend it. From there they proceeded to Mr. Thompson's farm, at which place they increased their number of stolen horses to some 25 or 30 head. The marauding party had divided up into squads, and before arriving at the residence of Mr. Sherman, they had collected together and now numbered about 56. When the Indians approached the house of the family, consisting of 6 persons, they were at dinner. One account we have says they were at breakfast. This, however, is immaterial. Several Indians galloped up to the yard fence, alighted from their horses, and went into the house and cordially shook hands with the family, making the most friendly demonstrations. After this exhibition of savage duplicity, these devils incarnate told the family to vamos, vamos, Indians no hurt. The presence of so many Indians, of course, very much alarmed the family. But owing to the disadvantage at which they were placed, both by the sudden appearance and the superior number of the Indians, resistance was not to be thought of. Nothing was left for the family but to do as they were directed. It was a cold, rainy day, but the unfortunate family, not wishing to incur the displeasure of these Indians, started off upon their journey through the forests. They had only gone about 1/2 mile, however, when a party of the fiendish band overtook them and ordered Mrs. Sherman to return to the house. The bereaved husband and children implored them not to take away the one they loved so dearly, but their entreaties were of no avail. The Indians said they wanted squaw, and without further ceremony tore the unfortunate woman from the embrace of those she loved so dearly. She was taken back to the house and subjected to all manner of torture, barbaric cruelty, and brutal treatment too horrible to relate. Let the imagination picture it if it can, this terrible tragedy. A description of it will not be attempted here. The agonizing screams of the victims seemed to delight the heartless monsters, and it was not until they had inflicted upon this poor woman every character of punishment which their devilish minds could invent, that they could make up their minds to leave. Not satisfied to leave Mrs. Sherman to survive, if she could, the trying ordeal through which she had passed, they deliberately stripped her of all her clothing, shot several arrows into her body, and when ready to leave, 2 Indians on horseback rode up on either side, and each taking hold of her dashed off while a 3rd Indian followed behind, and beat her in the back with a heavy stick. Finally she fell almost lifeless upon the ground, when an Indian warrior dismounted, passed his knife around her head, and tore off her scalp. She was then left for dead, but after the Indians had departed she revived sufficiently to crawl to the house, where she was soon found by her husband, who in the meantime had taken his children to a neighbor's and gotten a few friends to return with them to look after his wife. She was found in the condition we have just described, suffering 1,000 deaths from wounds received, and indignities to which she had been subjected. When she beheld her husband upon his return, by an effort almost superhuman she rallied sufficiently to relate to her bereaved companion the sad story of all her sufferings at the hands of these merciless demons. Mrs. Sherman lived 4 days after this cruel treatment. The day following the perpetration of this outrage, the children were taken back home to take a last look at their dying mother. The meeting was one never to be forgotten by those who witnessed the tragic and heartrending scene. We would be glad that the catalogue of murders might end here, but this is but the beginning in that section. So that's it for this very tragic story from J.W. Wilbarger's 1889 book, Indian Depredations in Texas. You can see the longer version of this video on our Patreon page, which includes additional accounts that are much more graphic and more detailed. A link to our Patreon page is available in the description of this video. This channel is called Unworthy History because we talk about actual history that is now deemed unworthy to show on history channels on TV, and because we talk about people who lived much harder lives than we have to today, people whose shoes we are unworthy to stand in. If you'd like to support the mission of Unworthy History, then consider joining our Patreon page. Patreon members will be recognized at the end of each episode, and will also have access to videos like the longer version of this one. I plan on releasing more of these type of videos that may be too intense for YouTube from time to time. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.